In this lesson, we're going to learn about the proper positioning of the left hand when playing the violin. Keep in mind that all left hands are different. We all have different unique physiologies, and what works for you might not work for someone else. And I'm going to teach you a few ways to navigate around different hand and finger sizes and lengths. So let's begin. What I'd like you to do first is keep in mind that on the violin there are no frets. Because, if there were frets, it would actually impede us from moving up and down the fingerboard. Particularly when you're holding the violin like that, you'd have too many bumps, and making smooth shifts, which means moving from a lower note to a higher note with the finger and the arm mechanism, would be virtually impossible. In guitar it works, possibly because of the angle of the fingerboard on the guitar, but on violin not so much. So what actually happens is that when you start learning violin, your teacher or the violin shop will most likely put tapes on the violin itself. They're like little thin white tapes which go across the fingerboard, and they tell you where your fingers go. Unfortunately on the video I can't do that for you. However, I would suggest that you please go to a violin shop or have a violin teacher do that for you, because you'll find that it greatly helps you out. Particularly if you want to do that in conjunction with this lesson. So even if you don't have the tapes, I think you'll find this lesson useful. So let's begin. The first thing I'd like to do is just get your hand and your thumb in the right place. Now, what we'll do is we'll put our violins up on our collarbone, and then I'd like you to take your left hand and put your left hand immediately to the left of the fingerboard. Have your wrist touching the edge of the neck of the violin, and you want it to be all the way at the end of the instrument so that your back of the hand is actually touching one of the pegs as well. Now, look how my wrist is very nice and natural and straight. Now, of course, we don't play like this, but what we do is we take our hand, we go under, around and up, just like that. And the ideal position for your hand should be in a way so that this part where your finger, your index finger, connects to your palm, that's the part that's going to be ultimately touching the fingerboard. Just like that. Now in my case, just above the middle knuckle of my thumb is where I'm making contact with the fingerboard. However, there are thumbs of different lengths and sizes. So I would base this exercise more on what this guy's doing right here. Now your thumb is probably more or less standard, so it will probably not be far off from where my thumb is touching. Now the next thing I'd like to teach you, before we talk about exactly what we're going to do, because this is just a concept, is how to make a mouse hold. Now if you put your first finger down on the A string, just tap it up and down and up and down. Put that finger on its tiptoes, as much as on its tiptoes as you can, and look for a little hole right there between your finger and the fingerboard. You want to actually have like a little tunnel. I call that a mouse hole. I can even fit my pinky through it. If you can't fit your pinky through it, that's okay, but you do need to have a hole there. You can try it on every string. Let's try the G string, the D string, the A string, and the E string. E string is the hardest, and I'll tell you why. I need to teach you something else so that you don't have trouble with the E string one. Basically, on the E string, very commonly, people do that, and they scrunch up, and the finger is very tense, and the reason is because there's another element we need to involve in this exercise, and that involves the left elbow. Just like we talked about in the bow arm, where the elbow is changing positions based on the string, this elbow also has to change positions based on which string you're on. So what's going to happen is that when you're on the G string, your elbow is going to be pulled over to the right. When you go on the D string, the elbow moves a little to the left. On the A string, more to the left, and on the E string, even more to the left. Now, you know what's really strange is that although your elbow is moving in the opposite direction of the string position, in other words, the strings move to the right. As you move to the right on the strings, I should say, the elbow moves to the left. But to you, it's going to feel like your elbow is actually moving to the right instead of moving to the left. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at your hand, all the fingers really point to the left from your perspective. In other words, if you're looking at your hand while it's positioned so that the fingers are over the fingerboard like an umbrella, kind of, you'll notice that all the fingers point left. So what's happening is that as you're moving your elbow to the right, your fingers are moving more to the left. And therefore, psychologically, it's almost feeling like your elbow is moving the opposite direction than it really is. So rather than now confusing you totally, what I'm going to say is just keep your elbow underneath the finger that you want to use. In other words, keep your elbow under the string you want to use. That's the way to say it. So let's talk now about what to do. Let's take our first finger, put it on the G string. Tap, 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 tap. Now take your first finger on the D string. Your elbow is going to move under that finger. Take your first finger on the A string. Your elbow is going to move under the finger again. Take your first finger, put it on the E string, and now your elbow moves under the finger again. So I think that will make sense to you now. Now the next question is, where exactly does that first finger go? Because it's one thing to say, oh well, I've seen it and I can see where it goes. It's another thing to say I hear it. Because at the end, our ultimate goal is to play in tune. Now this exercise is going to work best for people with longer fingers, particularly if your pinky is a little bit longer, because we're going to set up our hand position based on that first finger. Now in the next part of this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to set up that hand based on the ring finger and pinky finger, which is a different ball game totally. But let's keep going. And now I'd like you to get this position, your hand position. Just go through the motion again one more time, and then take your right hand. Show me your thumb. We're going to put that thumb on the corner of the fingerboard. Now that corner of the fingerboard is here. It's not the bridge. That's a very common mistake, but it's the corner of the fingerboard. Show me your index finger. Kind of wave to me with it. Now, plucking actually involves plucking over the fingerboard, not on the sounding point, which is what we do with the bow, but over the fingerboard. That's where we get the best sound. So I'd like you to now just pluck A string. Now put your first finger down with that mouse hole on the A string. Just like that. Try to imitate that sound. See if your finger is a little bit too high or too low. By high and low, what I mean is that if the finger is too close to your nose, it's too high. If it's too far away from your nose, it's too low. And what you'll find is that the sound gets higher as the finger gets higher. The sound gets lower as the finger gets lower. So we want to find this one. Just like that. Now that is called a whole step. The whole step goes da-dum, like do, deer, female, deer, you know the idea. So that's the sound we want to listen for. Let's do whole steps on every string. Let's start on the E string. Get your elbow under that E string with the mouse hole in the index finger. Let's go to the A string. Get that elbow under the A string. Let's go to the D string. Elbow under the D string. G string.